and most exotic creatures. The air buzzed with chatter, the clink of glasses, and the sharp, rhythmic voice of the auctioneer announcing bids. Cages lined the walls, each containing something considered valuable by those with deep pockets and shallow hearts. Among the vibrant plumage of alien birds and the shimmering scales of aquatic beasts was a small, unremarkable cage shoved into a dark corner. Inside, a frail albino wolf pup huddled, its thin body trembling with cold and fear. Its fur, pale as stardust, stood in stark contrast to the shadows around it, and its eyes, icy blue and haunting, blinked slowly, almost resigned. It had never known warmth, never felt affection. The handlers had scoffed at it, calling it defective. Its unique coloring was seen as ugly, a mutation that made it less valuable. It had been neglected, left to survive on scraps while the other creatures were pampered for presentation. Now, it waited in that cage, its fate dangling like a frayed thread. No one noticed it. No one cared. Until him. Corbin Vex stood at the entrance, leaning heavily on a cane that had seen better days. His eyes, tired and sharp all at once, scanned the room with a mix of disinterest and disdain. His clothes were worn, patched where time had frayed them, and his presence drew little attention amidst the glittering crowd. Once he had been someone, a mechanic whose name echoed across shipyards and spaceports. But time had stripped him of everything, his reputation, his work, and his will to hope. Now he was just another forgotten soul drifting through the galaxy's cracks. He didn't know why he had come. Maybe to remind himself of how far he had fallen. Maybe because the emptiness in his chest had become unbearable. Or maybe because fate had a cruel sense of timing. His gaze flitted over the various cages, unimpressed. But then he saw it. The small pale figure in the corner. His breath caught, and for a moment the noise of the auction hall faded into a dull hum. The pup's eyes locked onto his, and in that instant something within him stirred, a long-buried ember flickering to life. He limped closer, leaning on his cane, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't for years. The pup whimpered softly, pressing itself further into the corner as if expecting more cruelty. Corbin knelt as best he could, ignoring the pain in his knee. "Hey there, little one," he whispered, his voice rough but gentle. The pup stared at him, unblinking. There was no trust in those eyes, only weariness. But Corbin saw more. He saw himself, forgotten, unwanted, alone, and something inside him broke. The auctioneer's voice rang out, sharp and clear. Next up, Lot 72, a rare albino wolf pup, though perhaps not to everyone's taste. His tone carried a hint of mockery, prompting soft laughter from the crowd. The pup was brought forward, its small body barely filling the display pedestal. It shivered under the harsh lights, its pink nose twitching nervously. "Starting bid at 50 credits, the auctioneer announced, clearly expecting little interest. Silence. Corbin clenched his fists, his heart twisting. He didn't have much left, credits, pride, or otherwise, but something inside him screamed that he couldn't let this creature face whatever fate awaited it. "Please, credits," someone muttered sarcastically, eliciting chuckles. 20, another joked. Corbin's breath hitched. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his decision before he even made it. "Credits," he rasped, his voice barely carrying over the crowd. Heads turned. Laughter died. The auctioneer blinked. 30 credits from Corbin Vex," whispers spread like wildfire. "Corbin Vex? The disgraced mechanic? What's he doing here?" "No way," someone scoffed. "Didn't think he could afford a glass of water, let alone a creature." 40 credits, a young noble sneered, clearly more interested in humiliating Corbin than owning the pup. Corbin's jaw tightened. He dug into his pocket, feeling the worn chip that held the last of his savings. It wasn't much. It was all he had. 50 credits, he called, louder this time. The noble raised an eyebrow, then smirked. 60. Corbin's chest tightened painfully. He couldn't go higher. He just couldn't. But then the noble chuckled and waved dismissively. Not worth it. The auctioneer, slightly bewildered, waited for another bid. None came. Sold to Corbin Vex for 50 credits. The gavel struck, and the room erupted into murmurs. Corbin barely heard them. His eyes were locked on the pup as the handlers shoved it into his arms. It flinched at first, then froze, unsure of what to do. Corbin cradled it gently, his rough hand surprisingly tender. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe now." The pup stared at him, and for the first time Corbin saw something in those icy blue eyes that mirrored his own. A flicker of hope. The ride back to Corbin's small workshop on the outskirts of Vendor's capital was silent, save for the faint hum of his old speeder. The albino wolf pup, still trembling slightly, was curled up on the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at him with wary eyes. Corbin kept his gaze on the road ahead, but every so often, his fingers twitched with the urge to reach out and offer comfort. He didn't, afraid any sudden movement might scare the little creature further. When they finally arrived, Corbin parked outside his modest dwelling, a rusted single-story structure patched together with scrap metal and memories of better days. He let out a long sigh, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. What the hell was I thinking? He could barely afford to keep himself afloat, let alone care for a living creature. And yet, as he glanced at the pup still curled up tightly, a part of him knew he'd do it all over again, without hesitation. "Come on, kid," he muttered, gently lifting the pup into his arms. It flinched but didn't struggle, too exhausted to resist. Corbin carried it inside, the door sliding shut behind them with a hiss. The workshop was cluttered but cozy, tools strewn across workbenches, half-finished mechanical projects stacked in corners, and an old patched-up couch against the far wall. The faint scent of engine, oil and metal filled the air. Corbin set the pup down on the couch, grabbing an old blanket from a nearby chair. He hesitated for a moment, then draped it over the little creature. It blinked up at him, surprised by the sudden warmth. Corbin crouched down, resting his arms on his knees. "Don't look at me like that," he grumbled softly, though there was no bite in his voice. "I'm not some hero, just couldn't leave you there." The pup blinked, then let out a soft whimper. Corbin's heart twisted. He reached out tentatively, brushing a hand over its soft, pale fur. It flinched at first, but then settled, leaning slightly into his touch. "There we go," he whispered. "It's okay now." That night, Corbin couldn't sleep. He sat at his workbench, absent-mindedly tinkering with an old servo while his thoughts raced. His reputation had already been in tatters, and now this? Word would spread fast. Corbin Vex, the washed-up mechanic who wasted his last credits on a useless creature. He could already hear the mocking laughter. But every time he glanced at the couch where the pup now slept soundly, its tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, those thoughts didn't seem to matter as much. The next morning, Corbin was jolted awake by the faint sound of claws clicking against the metal floor. He blinked blearily, realizing he had fallen asleep at the workbench. Stretching with a groan, he turned to see the pup wandering around the workshop, sniffing curiously at wires and tools. "Hey," he called out, voice still rough from sleep. The pup's ears perked up and it immediately froze, eyeing him warily. Corbin chuckled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Relax, kid. You're not in trouble." The pup tilted its head, seemingly processing his words, then cautiously approached. Corbin crouched down, holding out a hand. "Gotta call you something, huh?" He thought for a moment, observing the pup's pale fur that seemed to glow faintly under the dim lights. "Luno," he whispered. "Yeah, that fits. What do you think?" Luno blinked, then let out a soft, approving whimper. Corbin chuckled, scratching behind its ears. Luno it is. Over the next few days, Luno settled into Corbin's routine. It followed him around the workshop, curiously watching as he repaired old engines and recalibrated broken circuits. At first, Corbin found it a little distracting, but soon he found himself talking to Luno as he worked, sharing stories of his past, of the ships he had built, the places he had traveled, and the mistake that had cost him everything. Luno listened, its icy blue eyes filled with something Corbin hadn't seen in a long time, understanding. Food was a challenge. At first, Corbin had little to spare, but he scrounged what he could, even trading some of his tools for better rations. It wasn't much, but Luno didn't seem to mind. In fact, the pup often left its own food untouched until Corbin made sure he had eaten too. One night, as Corbin sat cross-legged on the floor, tightening bolts on an old stabilizer, Luno curled up, beside him resting its head on his lap. Corbin froze, looking down at the pup. Slowly he reached out, running his fingers through its soft fur. Luno let out a contented sigh. Corbin felt something in his chest loosen, a knot he hadn't even realized was there. "Guess we're stuck with each other now, huh?" he whispered. Luno nuzzled closer, and for the first time in years, Corbin allowed himself to smile. Word traveled fast in Vendor's capital. The auction had been uneventful for most, but the news of Corbin Vex's unexpected purchase spread like wildfire. Luno's peculiar appearance and Corbin's tarnished reputation made for the perfect gossip. At first, Corbin ignored the whispers. Let them talk. He didn't care. But as days turned into weeks, the attention started to feel more ominous. Strange faces lingered near his workshop, eyes filled with curiosity and greed. Corbin tightened security, reinforcing the locks and installing surveillance systems salvaged from old ships. He knew all too well what could happen to creatures like Luno if the wrong people got their hands on them. Late one night, as Corbin welded a cracked engine casing, a soft growl from Luno caught his attention. The pup stood near the window, ears perked, growling low in its throat. "What is it, buddy?" Corbin asked, setting down his tools. He approached the window, peering into the darkness. At first he saw nothing, but then a shadow moved too quickly to be a passerby. "Damn it," Corbin muttered. "They're already sniffing around." Luno let out a soft whimper, pressing close to Corbin's leg. "Don't worry," Corbin whispered, stroking the pup's head. "I won't let anyone take you." The next day, an unexpected visitor arrived. Corbin almost didn't answer the persistent knocking, but curiosity got the better of him. He opened the door to find a tall, imposing figure with sharp features and piercing green eyes. She wore a sleek, dark coat, and her presence screamed authority. "Corbin Vex," she greeted, her tone neutral but firm. "Who's asking?" Corbin shot back, leaning on his cane. "Agent Sarah Wren," she replied, flashing a badge that marked her as part of Vendor's Enforcement Bureau. "I'm here about the wolf." Corbin's heart pounded. "Luno is none of your business." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "It became my business when your little purchase caught the attention of certain individuals, dangerous ones." Corbin scoffed. "Let me guess. You're here to take him?" She shook her head. "No, I'm here to warn you. There's a collector, Draven Krell. He deals in rare and exotic creatures. He's heard about your wolf and he's already made plans to take it." Corbin's grip on the door tightened. "Let him try." Sarah's eyes softened slightly. "You can't do this alone, Vex." Corbin glanced back at Luno, who watched the exchange from the corner of the room. "I've done everything alone for years," he muttered. "I'll manage." Sarah sighed. "Just be careful. Krell isn't someone you want to underestimate." As she left, Corbin locked the door, turning to Luno. "Looks like trouble's on its way," he whispered. Sensing the shift, Luno patted over and pressed its head against his hand. Corbin let out a shaky breath. "We'll be ready." The soft glow of flickering monitors illuminated Corbin's workshop as he hunched over his workbench, tools scattered around him. The faint hum of energy coils filled the room, a soothing rhythm that kept his hands steady, even as his mind raced. Luno sat beside him, watching intently, its icy blue eyes unblinking. Corbin's fingers moved deftly, soldering circuits onto a small panel, his mind simultaneously mapping out every possible point of entry into his home. The warning from Sarah Wren had haunted him for days now. Draven Krell wasn't just another collector. He was a predator who thrived on power and fear, and now he had set his sights on Luno. The thought made Corbin's blood boil. He had lost everything, once before. His career, his pride, his friends. But he wouldn't lose Luno. Not to someone like Krell. Luno let out a soft whimper, sensing Corbin's tension. The albino wolf padded closer, resting its head on his lap. Corbin sighed, setting down his tools and stroking the pup's fur gently. "Yeah, I know, kid," he whispered. "We've got a fight coming." He glanced at the crude schematic he had drawn on a scrap piece of metal, a rough plan to reinforce the workshop's defenses. It wasn't much, but it had to be enough. But before he could continue, a sharp knock echoed through the room, making Corbin freeze. Luno's ears perked up and it growled softly, hackles rising. Corbin grabbed his blaster, keeping it low but ready. He approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" he called out. "Relax, Vex," came a familiar voice. "It's me." Corbin sighed, unlocking the door to find Seren standing there, her usual stoic expression in place. "What do you want now?" Corbin grumbled, stepping aside to let her in. Ser took in the cluttered workshop with a raised eyebrow before focusing on Luno, who was now watching her warily. "He's grown," she observed softly. Corbin crossed his arms. "Is this a social visit, or do you have something useful to say?" Ser smirked. "Straight to business, all right." Darker than usual, the city's neon glow dimmed under the weight of an approaching storm. Corbin worked tirelessly, installing makeshift defense systems around the workshop. Automated turrets rigged from salvaged parts, reinforced barricades, and motion sensors that flickered to life every time a shadow passed too close. SRA provided blueprints for weak points in the building's structure and helped Corbin patch them up. She moved with military precision, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. Even as they worked, Luno stayed close to Corbin's side, its instincts sharp and alert. Every time a distant sound echoed through the streets, the wolf would let out a low growl, ready to defend its home. As the hours stretched on, Corbin found himself glancing at S more often than he'd like to admit. She wasn't what he had expected. There was a weight in her eyes, a story untold, but now wasn't the time to ask. "Why are you really helping me?" Corbin asked quietly as they reinforced the back entrance. S hesitated before answering. "Krell's taken too much from too many. Someone needs to stand up to him." Corbin snorted. "So you picked me? The washed-up mechanic with a target on his back?" She smirked. "Sometimes the most unexpected pieces make the strongest moves." Corbin chuckled softly. "That's supposed to be comforting?" "Take it how you want," S replied with a shrug. As dawn approached, the workshop was as fortified as it could be. Corbin sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, with Luno curled up beside him. S stood by the window watching the streets below. "They'll come soon," she said softly. Corbin nodded. "Let them." Luno lifted its head, eyes gleaming with determination. Together, they waited for the storm. The attack came just as the first light of dawn painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. Corbin's motion sensors flared to life, triggering silent alarms throughout the workshop. Luno was the first to react, bolting upright with a deep growl rumbling from its chest. Corbin grabbed his blaster, adrenaline surging through his veins. Was already at the window, her sharp eyes scanning the perimeter. "North side," she whispered. 2, 3 of them," Corbin cursed under his breath. "Bounty hunters?" "Definitely," S replied, readying her weapon. "Krell's finest." The first shot cracked through the morning air, striking the side of the workshop. Corbin ducked, pulling Luno close. "All right, kid. Time to earn our keep." Luno let out a sharp bark, its pale fur bristling, fired back, her precision impeccable. One of the hunters dropped, but the others scattered, taking cover. Corbin activated the automated turrets, and the sound of rapid gunfire filled the air. But the bounty hunters were fast, weaving through the narrow alleys with practiced ease. "Cover me," Corbin shouted, grabbing a makeshift EMP grenade from his workbench. "Go!" SRA barked, laying down suppressing fire. Corbin sprinted toward the side entrance, throwing the grenade just as one of the hunters aimed at him. The blast sent a pulse through the air, disabling their tech momentarily. "Now, Luno," Corbin called. The wolf dashed through the open doorway, its glowing fur making it a blur as it tackled the nearest hunter. The man screamed, trying to shake Luno off, but the wolf's jaws clamped down hard. Corbin fired at the second hunter, hitting his shoulder. S followed up with a precise shot that took him down. The last hunter, realizing he was outmatched, fled into the shadows. Corbin panted heavily, wiping sweat from his brow. Luno trotted back to him, blood on its muzzle, but eyes shining with pride. "Good job, kid," Corbin whispered, kneeling to hug the wolf tightly. S approached, checking the downed hunters. "This was just a test," she warned. "Krell will send more." Corbin's eyes hardened. "Then we'll be ready." Luno let out a low growl, standing tall beside its human. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The calm, after the first attack, was fleeting, like the eerie stillness before a storm tears through everything in its path. Corbin stood in his workshop, every muscle tense, his fingers twitching near the grip of his blaster. Luno sat beside him, its icy blue eyes locked on the door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. The faint hum of the security systems buzzed in the background, a constant reminder that danger was never far away. Paced near the window, scanning the street below with sharp, calculating eyes. She had barely spoken since the bounty hunters retreated, but Corbin knew her mind was racing as fast as his. They had won this round, but Krell wouldn't take defeat lightly. No, he would come back with more. More firepower, more bodies, more desperation. "Do you feel it?" S's voice broke the silence, low and serious. Corbin glanced at her. "Feel what?" "The pressure," she replied, not looking away from the window. "Like the whole city is holding its breath." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, it's like waiting for the other shoe to drop." "It's not just you," she said softly. "Everyone knows Krell doesn't lose, not without retaliation." Corbin chuckled bitterly. "Guess there's a first time for everything." S turned to face him, her green eyes narrowing. "This isn't a joke, Corbin. Krell isn't going to stop. Not after what happened today." "I'm aware," Corbin muttered, leaning against the workbench. "But I'm not handing Luno over to him. Not now. Not ever." Luno nuzzled against Corbin's leg as if reaffirming the silent promise between them. She studied them both for a moment, her gaze softening. "You really love that wolf, don't you?" Corbin smirked. "Love? Hell, I barely know what that word means anymore. But Luno? This little guy gave me a reason to keep fighting. I'm not letting anyone take that away." S nodded, a ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. "Then we need to be ready." The day stretched on, each hour slower than the last. Corbin busied himself fortifying the workshop, welding reinforced metal over the windows, and setting up additional traps around the perimeter. S, Ever, the strategist, mapped out potential entry points and planned countermeasures. Luno never left Corbin's side, watching his every move with unwavering loyalty. As dusk settled over Vendora, casting long shadows through the streets, Corbin finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. He sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. Luno curled up beside him. "You ever wonder how we got here?" Corbin whispered, running his fingers through Luno's soft fur. "Me, a washed-up mechanic with nothing left. And you, a tiny ball of trouble no one wanted." Luno let out a soft, contented huff. Corbin chuckled. "Yeah, me neither." The peaceful moment was shattered by the shrill scream of the alarm system. Corbin shot to his feet, blaster in hand. Sierra was already moving, her weapon drawn as she scanned the monitors. "They're here," she said grimly. Corbin's heart pounded. "How many?" Sierra's jaw tightened. "Too many." Corbin cursed under his breath. The monitors flickered, showing dark figures moving swiftly through the alleys, closing in from all sides. Krell wasn't holding back this time. "Get ready," Corbin muttered. "This is going to be rough." Luno growled low in its throat, standing protectively in front of Corbin, its fur bristling. The first blast hit the front door, sending sparks flying. Corbin fired back instantly, hitting one of the attackers. Sierra took out another with a precise shot through the window. The workshop turned into a war zone. Explosions rattled the walls and smoke filled the air. Corbin's ears rang from the constant gunfire, but he never stopped moving, never stopped fighting. Luno darted through the chaos, using its small size to its advantage, leaping onto attackers and knocking them off balance. Its pale fur glowed, faintly in the dim light, making it a ghostly blur that was impossible to hit. Corbin shot an attacker trying to flank him, then ducked behind a workbench to reload. "We can't hold them off forever," he shouted over the noise. "I know," Sierra yelled, backfiring relentlessly. "We need an exit." Corbin's mind raced. The back door was already compromised and the front was a death trap. Then it hit him. "The old service hatch," he shouted. Sierra nodded, covering him as he bolted for the hatch hidden beneath a pile of scrap. He yanked it open, gesturing for Sierra and Luno. "Go. I'll cover you." Sierra hesitated. "Corbin, go," he roared. She nodded reluctantly, disappearing down the hatch with Luno close behind. Corbin fired a few more shots, then dove in after them, sealing the hatch behind him just as an explosion rocked the workshop above. They crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel, the sound of gunfire fading behind them. Finally, they emerged into the night, gasping for air. Corbin looked back at the smoke rising from what used to be his home. His chest ached. Not from the fight, but from the realization that everything he had left was gone. Everything except Luno. The wolf pressed against him, its glowing blue eyes filled with concern. Corbin wrapped an arm around it, taking a shaky breath. "We're still standing," he whispered. "That's all that matters." Sierra placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll find another way. Krell hasn't won yet." Corbin nodded. "No, he hasn't." But deep down, he knew. The final confrontation was coming. And he'd be ready. The safe house Sierra led them to was little more than an abandoned storage unit on the outskirts of the city. But it was hidden, and for now that was enough. Corbin patched up his blaster while Luno curled up beside him, occasionally lifting its head to sniff the air. Sierra paced, deep in thought. "We can't keep running," she muttered. "Krell has too many eyes, too many resources." Corbin sighed. "Then what do you suggest? Surrender?" She shot him a glare. "Of course not. But we need a plan, a real one." Corbin leaned back, thinking. If we hit him where it hurts. Take out his resources, his allies. Maybe we stand a chance." Sierra nodded slowly. "We'd need to move fast. Krell doesn't give second chances." Corbin smirked. "Neither do I." Luno barked softly, as if agreeing. They spent hours planning, mapping out Krell's network, identifying weak points. Corbin's mechanical skills and Sierra's tactical mind formed a formidable duo. Finally, they were ready. Night fell once more and the city became their battlefield. Corbin and Sierra moved like shadows, striking Krell's supply lines, disabling his communications, and turning his allies against him with carefully planted evidence. Each victory was small but devastatingly effective, chipping away at Krell's empire piece by piece. Luno became their secret weapon. Its glowing fur and sharp instincts allowed them to navigate the darkest corners of the city unseen. It darted through enemy lines, delivering messages, scouting ahead, and even sabotaging equipment with surprising precision. Krell's frustration grew with every loss. His fury was palpable, and Corbin knew they were getting close, but Krell was far from defeated. The final blow came when they intercepted a transmission from Krell himself. He was planning a full-scale assault on the city, blaming Corbin and Luno for his losses. Innocent lives would be caught in the crossfire. Corbin's blood ran cold. "We have to stop him." Sierra's eyes hardened. "We will." The final showdown loomed. As Corbin prepared his weapons, he glanced at Luno. "We've come this far, kid," he whispered. "No turning back now." Luno nuzzled his hand, its blue eyes fierce with determination. Together, they would face the fire, and together, they would survive. The city of Vindor stretched beneath the twin moons, its towering spires casting jagged shadows over the sprawling streets below. The neon glow of market stalls flickered like dying embers, and the air crackled with tension. Rumors of Krell's impending attack had spread like wildfire, sending waves of panic through the populace. Merchants shuttered their stores, citizens locked their doors, and the hum of distant ships preparing for evacuation filled the air. Night. But amidst the chaos, 3 figures moved with purpose through the labyrinthine alleys. Corbin, his face grim and determined, led the way, with Luno padding silently beside him. The albino wolf's blue eyes gleamed in the darkness, its pale fur glowing faintly, casting ghostly reflections against the metal walls. Behind them, Sira moved with the precision of a seasoned soldier, her sharp eyes scanning every shadow for threats. "We're running out of time," Sira whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of the city. Corbin's jaw tightened. "Then we move faster." He gripped his blaster tightly, the weight of it grounding him. The plan was reckless, but it was the only chance they had. Krell's stronghold, a heavily fortified compound on the outskirts of the city, was where they would make their stand. It was a place Corbin had sworn never to return to, a graveyard of his past mistakes. But now, it was their only hope. As they navigated the maze of alleys, Corbin's mind drifted back to the last time he had faced Krell. He had been younger then, cocky and naive, thinking he could outsmart the notorious collector. But Krell had crushed him, stripping him of everything he held dear. The scars of that defeat still lingered. But now, Corbin had something to fight for. He glanced down at Luno, who met his gaze with unwavering loyalty. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about protecting the only family he had left. They reached a narrow bridge overlooking the industrial sector, where Krell's compound loomed like a monolith of greed and power. Sira crouched beside Corbin, her eyes narrowing as she assessed. "The defenses. Turrets on every corner, patrols every 15 minutes, she muttered. "We have to disable the power grid first." Corbin nodded. "I can handle that." "And if you can't?" Sira asked, raising an eyebrow. "Then we improvise," Corbin replied with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. Luno let out a soft growl, sensing the tension. Corbin scratched behind its ears, whispering, "We'll be okay, kid. We've got this." The trio moved swiftly, blending into the shadows as they approached the compound. Corbin's heart pounded in his chest, each step bringing them closer to the point of no return. He could feel Luno's warm breath against his hand, a silent reassurance that he wasn't alone. Reaching the perimeter, Corbin pulled out a small device. From his belt, a makeshift EMP generator cobbled together from scrap parts. It wasn't pretty, but it would do the job. He glanced at Sira, who gave him a curt nod. 2 minutes, she whispered. "That's all you get." "More than enough," Corbin replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. As Sira and Luno slipped into the shadows to take their positions, Corbin moved toward the power grid. The fence hummed with energy, but Corbin had spent years dismantling systems just like this. With practiced ease, he bypassed the security measures, his fingers moving swiftly over the control panel. Seconds felt like hours as he worked, every beep and click echoing louder in his mind. Finally, the system flickered and the compound's lights dimmed. "Showtime," Corbin whispered, activating the EMP. A pulse of energy rippled through the air. The entire compound plunged into darkness. First, taking out the nearest guards with silent precision, Luno followed, a blur of white fur and sharp teeth, as it incapacitated anyone who got too close. Corbin joined them, his blaster firing with deadly accuracy. The element of surprise was theirs, but it wouldn't last long. They reached the main control room, where Krell's voice echoed through the speakers. "Corbin Vex, I should have known you'd crawl out of whatever hole you've been hiding in." Corbin clenched his teeth. "I'm not here for you, Krell. I'm here to end this." Krell's laughter sent chills down Corbin's spine. "End this? Oh, Corbin, You've only just begun. The room shook as automated defenses activated, turrets swiveling toward them. Sierra dove for cover, firing back, while Luno darted through the chaos, dodging blasts with agility that bordered on supernatural. Corbin hacked into the control panel, trying to disable the defenses. Sweat dripped down his face as he worked, but Krell's security was formidable. "Corbin!" Sierra shouted, pinned down by gunfire. "Any day now." "Working on it," Corbin snapped. Luno let out a fierce howl, leaping onto one of the turrets and tearing it apart with its claws. The distraction gave Corbin the time he needed. With one final keystroke, the defenses powered down. The silence that followed was deafening. Sierra stood, breathing heavily, her weapon still raised. "Is it over?" Corbin shook his head. "Not yet." The door to the control room slid open, and Krell stepped in, flanked by heavily armed guards. His cold, calculating eyes locked onto Corbin with a predatory grin. "Impressive," Krell drawled, "but predictable." Corbin raised his blaster, but Krell's guards were faster, aiming their weapons at Sierra and Luno. "Drop it," Krell ordered. Corbin hesitated, but Luno's soft whimper made his decision for him. He lowered his weapon, glaring at Krell. "Smart choice," Krell sneered. "But you can't win, Corbin. You never could." Corbin's mind raced, searching for a way out. Then he felt it. A spark. A connection. Luno's fur began to glow, brighter than ever before, filling the room with an ethereal light. "What is this?" Krell hissed, shielding his eyes. Corbin's heart pounded. "Luno, what are you doing?" The wolf let out a deafening howl, and a surge of energy exploded from its body, knocking Krell and his guards to the ground. The room trembled. As the light grew blinding and Corbin felt himself being pulled into the glow. When the light finally dimmed, Corbin found himself standing in a vast, open field under a sky filled with stars. The air was crisp and a gentle breeze whispered through the grass. Luno stood beside him, its fur shimmering like the night sky. Corbin blinked in confusion. "Where are we?" A voice answered, soft and melodic. "A place beyond time." Corbin turned, to see a figure cloaked in light, their features indistinct. "Who are you?" "I am the Guardian," the figure replied. "And Luno is not just any wolf. He is the last of the Luma, a species bound to protect the balance of the galaxy." Corbin's breath caught. Then why was he abandoned? The Guardian's light flickered with sadness. Fear. His kind was hunted for their power, and in a desperate attempt to save him, his mother sent him away. "To you." "To me?" Corbin whispered, overwhelmed. "Yes," the Guardian said gently. "Because you, Corbin Vex, have a heart strong enough to protect him." Corbin looked at Luno, who nuzzled him softly. Tears stung his eyes. "I'm just a broken mechanic." The Guardian's light glowed brighter. "No, Corbin. You are his family." The vision faded, and Corbin found himself back in the control room. Krell and his guards were unconscious, and Sierra was staring at him in shock. "What just happened?" she asked. Corbin exhaled shakily. "Long story." They made their way out of the compound, Krell's empire crumbling behind them. As they reached the city streets, Corbin felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "You're really something else, kid," he whispered to Luno. Sierra chuckled softly. "Looks like you've got a new title, Corbin. Guardian of the Luma." Corbin smirked. "Sounds fancy, but I'll stick with mechanic." As they disappeared into the night, Corbin knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of their story.